Hi everyone, thank you very much for watching this interview with myself and Bill Rogers. This interview is supported by Teachwell Toolkit. If you haven't heard of Teachwell Toolkit, they provide senior mental health lead training for schools, and it's fully funded, so it doesn't cost the schools a penny. So if you're interested in having a senior mental health lead in your school and you don't already have one, visit teachwelltoolkit.com. Get in touch with Steve and Sunita and book yourself in for some training. It's fully funded. Why not? Thanks very much to Teachwell Toolkit for supporting this show on Teachers Talk Radio, and I really hope you enjoy the interview with Bill Rogers.
Full of outstanding and world-class vision and world-class this.
I'm a real leadership geek, honestly. I've spent my whole career reading books and chatting to people.
I just find the whole thing and the announcement, the way it's been announced, bizarre.
If you could move away from a model where teachers are so intensely focused.
Right, I just want to welcome everybody to this interview. I'm joined by Bill Rogers, who over many decades has worked as a teacher and then also as a behaviour consultant for the Victoria Department of Education in Australia before moving into consultancy. Bill has written several books, including Classroom Behaviour, a practical guide to effective teaching, behaviour management and colleague support, which is now in its 4th edition and has been translated into multiple languages. And anybody who doesn't know, Bill is still working across lots of schools around the world, helping teachers, team teaching with them, coaching them, lecturing on behaviour management, and lots of other things. Is there anything I've missed in that introduction, Bill, that you would like to add in?
No, more than sufficient, Tom.
Brilliant.
And probably far too generous anyway.
I don't think so. Bill, I wanted to start off, in a recent interview, you said making sure that you call every student to account, regardless of the issues those individuals might be facing, is the cornerstone of good behaviour management. And I was hoping, just to begin with, we could dig into that a little bit and you could maybe expand on what led you to say that recently.
Well, what led me to say that was experience and reality, because many of the children we work with who come from very complex situations, including trauma, asylum seekers, refugees, children with diagnosed or symptomatic behaviour disorders, children from families where there's significant substance abuse, right the way through to families where there is the evil of other kinds of abuse, with some men, some evil and disturbing men, a very small percentage, thank God, but we have children from those families, as you well know. We get families who have very complex domestic lives, long-term unemployment, what we might call first world poverty. The list could go on. And the thing is, when the children come from those families or those very complex and difficult situations, come to a place called a school, a local learning community, the only person that has to deal with behaviour that's problematic and at times dangerous in some occasions is the teacher. It's not a psychologist, it's not a social worker, not somebody from the department whose room is bigger than a classroom. It's the teacher. They have to deal with the behaviour. That's the point. That doesn't mean to say the teacher is unaware or unsympathetic to the situations that some of our children come from. But what it means is that when they're in a group, when you've got 20 or 25 children in a group, and a student behaves in a way that's significantly distracting or disruptive or dangerous, and all of those happen, it's the teacher who has to deal with it in a group context. That's the point. And I have sat down with some, and I stress some in the largest possible letters that I could neon light in an interview. There are some psychologists I've come across and some social workers And even on rare occasions, some school principals who say, well, he's fine when he's with me. And if I keep using the male pronoun, it's for reasons that shouldn't need to be explained. He's fine when he's with me. And of course he is when he's got an undivided audience of one, a caring undivided audience of one, a supportive undivided audience of one, and so on. Put him back in the classroom. How is that lad seeking to belong, with or without a diagnosed disorder, with or without the tumultuous history he may carry or she may carry? He has to belong in some way, no matter what his home situation is. And the common ways that these children will behave under the pressure and demands, natural demands of a classroom environment, is through behavior that acts itself out. And sometimes that may be for attention. It may be a power struggle with the teacher. And at that point, the teacher has to deal with the behavior, not the preconditions of that behavior, which can be and should be addressed in one-to-one context that the school can provide in all sorts of ways that you may wish to raise later. And so when I've had those conversations with people who have perhaps a natural concern for the uniqueness of the individual, they forget that we can't treat the child uniquely in the classroom. Of course we treat every child as unique, but you can't treat them uniquely. You can't stop a lesson when a 5 or 6-year-old's rolling around on the mat, poking others with his foot and laughing and acting out attentively, whatever his background. You can't stop and have a 5-minute discussion's not the right word, but maybe a counselling session to help him this way. It's absurd. And I just wish some of the more idealistic people in universities would understand the reality of what teachers have to face. And there are ways of dealing with behaviour that most of my colleagues and I have spent our lives trying to do with the reality of what teachers face, but not unsympathetic and unaware of the preconditions that contribute to those behaviours acting out in the way they do. So it's a long answer, Tom, but that's the ground on which I respond to the question.
I think your response is going to chime with a lot of teachers today. I obviously am a teacher in the UK. I think that a lot of teachers in the UK are alarmed and feel a great degree of challenge based on the behaviour that they're sort of confronted with. But I wondered whether, because you sort of touched on this in your article a little bit, because you were talking about COVID and you were talking about the how some would equate the challenge, the worsening, if you like, of behavior across the board, because that's there in any survey you want to look at. Any survey you want to look at, teachers are saying behavior is worse. So I guess then it comes down to, is that, are you saying sort of kids are kids and we're sort of forgetting the fundamentals of what we need to do as teachers? Or are we saying behavior has got worse and therefore that's a little bit out of the teacher's control? Like, where do you sort of sit on that? That's a lot I've put in there.
Yeah, I think it's a bit of both, Tom. It's not as simple either or.
No.
One of the people that's influenced me enormously in my journey as a teacher and as in the work that I've sought to do since I left full-time teaching, including, by the way, an enormous amount of work one-to-one with teachers, literally team teaching in very, very difficult schools. And I mean very, very difficult schools, Tom, where the mentoring is literally teaming, not sitting down the back and watching, but literally teaming over a period of time to help the teacher existentially to get feedback on characteristic patterns of behavior in the teacher and the class, and use that shared trust to try to build a more workable teaching and learning community with that group of students, which is an incredibly labor-intensive model for professional development, but one that I've found extremely helpful. And I've learned a lot from that myself as a teacher myself, but also alongside my colleagues that I've worked with as an invited mentor. But the person that's helped me mostly, I think, in my whole journey is a man called Alfred Adler. Alfred Adler was a brilliant psychiatrist who worked alongside Freud, but parted company with him in the early 1920s. And when the Nazis came to power, Alfred Adler, along with several other psychiatrists, went to America because Hitler had closed down all the child guidance clinics in Vienna. But the main thesis of Adler and his associates, one in particular, a man called Professor Rudolf Dreikurs, who's long since passed away as Adler has, the main thesis of these two psychiatrists and others within that field is that when children come into a social group, like a family or a school, they're the two primary social groups that children progress through. Their primary social need is to belong, which is true for all of us, by the way. It's our primary social need. We have many, many needs, but that's our primary social need. If they come from highly disaffected homes or deeply disturbing homes, or on the other hand, highly indulged homes, and there are many children who come from homes where they are highly indulged by their parents, perhaps more so today than probably any other time, at least in my living memory, at 77 years of age. But along that spectrum of highly indulged or highly disaffected, if they come from those homes, they tend to, according to this thesis of Alfred Adler, they tend to get a sense of inferiority that they're trying to compensate for. And while this is true for all of us to some degree, it's part of our human makeup. So when they come into a social group, their primary need is to belong. And if they don't believe or haven't learnt and don't believe that they can belong in reasonably cooperative ways, they will find other ways to belong. And the two most common there are several, but the two most common that Adler and his associates identified over and over again were acting out behaviors where the child calls attention to himself, rolling around on the mat, hiding under the table and kicking with his feet, poking others on the mat, pinching others on the mat, repeated calling out, repeated talking while the teacher's teaching. And these children know what they're doing. They may not know fully what they're doing in the sense of achieving that sense of belonging, but in their private logic, they've worked out that this is how they get a sense of belonging. People notice me. And then he goes on to posit that some children go beyond the need to be attended to, notice me, notice me, notice me, blow everybody else, I'm the most important person in the room, to those who engage in a power struggle. These are the children who are highly argumentative, querulous, right through to downright defiant. And in clinical terms, you might talk about oppositional defiance disorder, for example. So they're not just saying, notice me, they're saying, make me, come on, make me. I can do what I want and you can't stop me. And I was tempted to put a few swear words in there. You cannot stop me doing what I want to effing do in order to belong. Now, they don't literally use that terminology in their head, but substantially that's what's going on in their private logic. And of course, we have to attend to these behaviors. We can't ignore them. When a student's repeatedly calling out, you can't ignore that. You must address it. So how do you address it in the public domain of the classroom? And importantly, in long-term behavior support, how do you work with that lad to help him to achieve his sense of belonging without having to resort to those patterns of behavior that he's learned primarily from the home and then reinforced even in those early years of primary school? And so using the work of Alfred Adler and others, my colleagues and I have tried to work on strategies and practices at the classroom level to more effectively deal with that behavior, but also personally, one-to-one, work with a child to help him to get a sense of belonging that doesn't have to keep resorting to highly acting out behaviours or power struggling behaviours. I pass that off as a comment, and with the COVID issue, I don't think COVID is. I think we've gone past COVID now. Any appeals to COVID as a trigger for worsening behaviour in schools, I think, is finished now. Children know what schools are for. They know what schools are for before they went into the COVID years, and they know now. And I think that's become, for some, a convenient excuse for the behaviour of their children. I mean, with some parents and some educators. And at the risk of lecturing, I'll stop there at that point.
It makes perfect sense what you're saying. There will be those who I'm sure will say that the world's changed, and we need to adapt to the change. The world, that I wouldn't say that, by the way, but there are a lot of people out there who will say that there is a massive sort of movement, I guess, towards the idea of school being more, would I use the word optional, but more, whereas in the past it was seen as this sort of one of the pinnacles of life as a young person, whereas now it's like, well, is it? A lot of people aren't happy with the way schools are. A lot of people seem to be challenging the status quo and saying we want something completely different from teachers and from the curriculum and from schools themselves. We think the whole system needs to change. I'm not one of those people necessarily, but that's what a lot of people say.
Well, I don't know a lot of people you're referring to, but I don't doubt what you're saying, Tom. And there was a lot of that through the 70s, a lot of literature produced on that, along that issue. School, though, the concept of a school as a local learning community,
Yeah,
is probably the one safest and sanest place, particularly for children from disadvantaged homes, where they can come for a third of their day with safe, sane, and secure adults who create a safe and workable learning community. Now, whatever discussions we might have about what the curriculum ought to contain, that's one thing a school can do. And I remember being involved in a debate in New Zealand, I don't know, about 15 years ago, with a whole lot of educators, and one of them that really got completely up my nose was one who said, we don't need schools. We've got computers now, we can access blah, blah, blah. Can you imagine a group of children trying to access, with any meaningful length of time, through computers to people they don't know, but have been said that they can trust to help them with their learning journey? To me, that would be an awful way to treat children in terms of the progression of learning. And there has to be some core curriculum that children can be safely taught with safe, sane, trained people called teachers, excuse me, whether it's for a third of their day or not, so that they can progress in their emerging adult world. Because without that, they're not going to get it in any other workable form. And we've got these forms that we've developed over a long time. And thankfully, these places are now very safe, sane, and secure. We have breakfast programs, we have after-school programs, we have supportive counselling programs, we have linked with social workers and so on. The amount of support in schools now is remarkable. I went to a school in Harlesden where I had to wear a dunce's cap just after the war in the 50s.
Yeah.
Was caned a number of times at the high school I went to and so on. I won't bore you with all of that.
Yeah.
Schools today are almost the polar opposite. They're almost the polar opposite. So any argument that somebody wants to dish up, I imagine would not be a practicing teacher. I would imagine it will be an ideologue who thinks that somehow there's something we can put in the place of a safe local learning community that has links with the local support possibilities for the children in that school. That would be my starting point for a discussion if we were to have one, Tom, in that area. I don't think we can dispense with, not only do I not think we can, I don't think we should dispense with schools in the way that they've developed now. We can always work on curriculum, and we should.
Yeah, got you. I noticed you also said, sorry to keep going back to that interview, but I just found it really interesting, the one that you did with Tez. And you mentioned that you said during it, you said, don't re-victimize them, but
yes,
but de-victimize them.
Yes.
I really like that. So I wondered whether you can explain what you mean by that, because
the thing about re-victimizing is all the things that we could list that make up any causative pathology in the child, whether it's coming from a country where their family's been victimized and worse, they've had to come through, I nearly said concentration camps, but holding camps before they can finally get to our country, Australia. And then they appear in a classroom from Sudan or Somalia or Syria or anywhere. When they behave in highly disruptive ways, or challenging or dangerous ways, we can't allow what their experience for us to treat him so differently in the classroom at the expense of any other child who perhaps hasn't had that journey. Because all that does is to say, well, we can't help you, son. Where you've come from is so disturbing. You've got a father that doesn't deserve to be called a father. He's shot through on your mother. Your mother is on serious medication to cope with the other two boys in your family. The arrears and debt in your family are huge. The list goes on and on and on, and could go on and on and on. So therefore, son, I don't think we can help you to be literate, numerate, socially aware, or socially engaged, or engage the world of history or geography and understand how the world works. We can't do that, son, because of all this situation. That is, I can't say how deeply disturbing that view is. And some of the ideologues I come across in university have no idea how schools really work. You know, day after day, 5 days a week, 4 terms a year. We have a 4-term year. Have no idea. You can't keep counselling children in the classroom. There has to be a balance where we teach the child how he can belong with all of his other peers in that one or several classrooms in a high school. The balance between the counselling support and behaviour support we give that lad and what happens when he's in the classroom with the fair expectations of behaviours like we put our hand up in class discussions without calling out, so we all get a fair go. So when I'm holding a class discussion with any age of children, even up to year 12 at times, if there's a particularly disturbing pattern of group behaviour, I would expect the students and call on them in a discussion to put their hand up without calling out, so we all get a fair go. And if they do call out, I'll remind them. Remember, it's hands up, so we all get a fair go. I won't ask them why they're calling out. I won't say don't call out. I'm very conscious on calling for behaviour awareness. And if several kids are calling out, some of you are still calling out. Remember, it's hands up without calling out, so we all get a fair go. Yeah, Sean, Bill, I'd like to see your hands up. Thanks for waiting. And off we go. And I'll keep doing that until that routine is embedded. And I'll start with that routine. Or if I'm working with a teacher who's maybe let that slip and lost a bit of goodwill with the kids, we'll bring that routine back, along with other routines and expectations, by the way, including workable noise levels in the room. is you've got 25 kids in a room, for crying out loud. You can't have high levels of noise. We know from the research that hinders attention, focus and attention, and on-task ability to have a small discussion in your table group. We know that. So we'll work together to re-establish those routines through the mentoring relationship. So the lad has to learn that, and he can learn that. And the counselling support and behaviour support will reinforce that.
Mm.
We haven't even gone on to the level of behaviour support yet, but that the balance between those two and whatever social welfare support the school can provide are all ways in which enable that lad to get the best he can out of that local learning community. And that will be the one place, by the way, that he can get it. Where else is he going to get that? Where else will he have the opportunity and privilege of fundamental learnings that will help him in his life journey, plus the support for the way he interprets and understands the world, plus the links with social welfare support that can help his families, the family dynamic.
Mm. I think one of the things that you see quite a lot, and it's become more and more of a trend. I mean, I started teaching in 2007. I'm still teaching now part-time, but one of the things that I've seen more and more of is a focus on relationships. The word relationships comes up time and time again. And it's almost become sort of, to be a good teacher, you just have to get the relationships right. You just have to have these good relationships. And I know you've talked about young teachers, you've talked about teachers coming into the profession and maybe taking that as, you know, do I need to sort of be friends with the students or pander to the students or plead with the students, or, you know, I wondered whether you could maybe go on that bit and talk a little bit about that, because it is a big thing. You see it all the time. Relationships. If you crack the relationships, you crack teaching, which sort of makes sense to me as a sort of humble professional. I get it. But there's that almost underlying part of it of, if you're not liked all the time, then you can't have those great relationships. Do you know what I mean?
Well, the first thing I want to say is that you don't go into teaching as a teacher leader in a classroom to be liked. If that's the basis on which you build your teacher leadership and relationship with a group, there's problems from the start. If you're wanting to be liked is the way you present yourself and engage with a group of students in the establishment phase of a relationship with a grade or several classes, if you're a high school teacher, is almost bound to create problems further down the track. And the other thing about relationships, and I would agree that building relationships is axiomatic. It's not the only axiom, but it is axiomatic to the way that we initiate and develop relational trust with children. But you have no relationship initially. You have to build that relationship within the kind of teacher leader you ought to be. You're the adult in the room. Even with a year 12 class, you are the adult in the room. They do not have the experience that you have. They do not have the professional responsibility you have to set and frame the curriculum with enabling discussion, of course. It's not just impositional curriculum, but we set the curriculum. We set the expectations behavior. We don't ask the children, for example, whether they're 5 or 15, morning, guys, day one, morning, guys, what rights do you think we have, guys, and what roles do you think we ought to have? That's a facile way to begin a discussion, even with a year 12, because the right to feel safe is not negotiable. The right to learn without undue, unfair, and unnecessary distraction is not negotiable. The right to be treated respectfully and with dignity is not negotiable. It's founded in the UN Charter on the Rights of the Child and has been since even the League of Nations. Those basic rights were beginning to be enshrined then, let alone the subsequent conventions on the rights of the child. So we don't start with negotiation. We start with guided discussion around those rights. And then we build those rules and routines from that discussion. But we are the guiding leader of children and emergent adults at high school level. And through the quality of that leadership and the way we lead and the way that we control the environment, not the children, that's not our job. Our job is to help the children to control themselves in relationship to others. As we do that, we build that relationship. They learn to trust us, and we don't go in with this facile, pathetic desire to be liked by the children. If you are that kind of leader who's respectful, calm but firm where they need to be, clear, calm and firm where they need to be, with fair routines that enable the smooth running of a classroom, fair expectations for behavior and the way we treat one another, you will gain their respect and their trust. You build that from the kind of leader you are. That does not happen accidentally through some belief that you have that relationship at the beginning by trying to be buddies or friends. That's a recipe for the class slowly to start to go down. Well, because within the distribution of students, you've got that core of students, maybe 15% on the left of the distribution, who are trying to belong by being highly attentional and provocative.
Yeah.
Those silly class clowns.
Yeah.
Kids who make smart aleck comments, kids who put others down in the room. And what's a teacher going to do? If I'm running a class discussion and a kid says, excuse my language here, Tom, says that's bullshit, and that's mild, by the way.
Yeah.
If I don't then say to that lad, Shannon, excuse me for a moment, Elise, Shannon, that language is not okay here, and you know that. If you want to disagree with somebody, you do so respectfully when it's your turn. Sorry, finish what you were saying. If I don't give some moral weight to a put-down comment from day one, rather than say in a weak, insipid way, that wasn't a nice thing to say, was it? Was it? And come out with a facile kind of almost, here, Tom, almost a pleading kind of appeasing statement. The majority of the kids will not respect that. In fact, in time, they may start to unthinkingly collude with these smart aleck comments on the kids who are acting out. So from day one, the establishment phase is probably the most important phase in the life of a teacher with their students.
Yeah.
If we can get that as reasonably right as we can get anything in our profession, including very early follow-up with the high-risk students and appropriate restorative conversations, generally speaking, the year just gets better and better. And in time, those relationships are formed, appropriate relationships between an adult in the role of teacher leader and minors who are our responsibility as teachers leaders. No question about that, the establishment phase. But all this appeasing nonsense, I just get so concerned when I see a teacher saying, guys, I think it would be helpful if you put your hand up. Do you think it would? I mean, what a pathetic. Instead of saying it's a class discussion, remember it's hands up. Even before we start the discussion, I would do that at least every day for the first 2 weeks until I can start to feel it's second nature and I don't need to say it. And it will be said in a relaxed way. Remember having a class discussion, everyone. This is a tricky one today too, some of the things we're discussing. So remember, hands up without calling out. If you disagree, give a reason for why you disagree when it's your turn. Thanks. Who'd like to start? You know what I mean? You begin a discussion like that where you're controlling the situation to enable them to control themselves. You're not controlling them, which is what happened when I was a child. If that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. Yeah. What I wanted to ask you next, Bill, on that note, was about the support that you think school leaders should give to teachers on behavior. I know that's a very general thing, but the do's and the don'ts, if you like, because one of the things that's come up in the UK, at least fairly recently, there's a lot of teachers who sometimes feel disenfranchised. They sometimes feel as though their authority has been taken away somehow by leadership, in the sense of, you know, they've got a problem in the class, and you know, that there's not support there for that. They feel they're not supported in some way, shape, or form when there's an issue in the class with students, and they sometimes can feel undermined or whatever, those sort of emotions. I wondered if you had any thoughts or advice on how leaders should support teachers in the classroom on behavior.
That's a big question, Tom. I mean,
Big question.
I think I'll start with an overall answer and then try to hone in from there. The schools that I've worked with, where I've worked long term, and it's not just the schools I've worked with, but schools of a similar understanding, where they have a whole school approach to behavior leadership that has very clear aims and structures in place and very clear expectations for teacher practice, the way we lead for behavior. They have very clear guidelines for at-risk situations where timeout procedures may be used appropriately and safely and respectfully, with restorative follow-up. Those schools, the teachers record as being more supportive, being more supported by their leadership.
Yeah.
For example, let's take a high-risk situation where a student is effectively holding a class to ransom.
Yeah.
And I'll give you an example here, and I have to be careful here. It's not a unique example, but I need to be careful here, of a primary school. And one of my students alerted me to this. A little boy in grade 1, 6-year-old, was rolling around on the mat during whole class teaching time, poking others with his foot, touching with his finger, then rolling away again, rolling back, poking, pushing, and laughing and giggling, clearly acting out behavior, the sort of behavior you might expect from a 3 or 4-year-old, unguided by their parents. Anyway, she did all the things that I would have thought would be helpful for the child. You know, Shannon, over here, you need to be sitting here facing this way with everyone else. They were very clear, specific, respectful behavior cues. No silly questions. Why are you rolling around on the mat? You shouldn't be doing that, should you? But very clear behavior awareness, directional behavior awareness cues. You need to be over here sitting with the others on the mat facing this way. And she would give him a little bit of take-up time by turning away facing the group.
Yeah.
And he did this for a while, then rolled back again. So it was kind of, the encephalogram was like this.
Yeah.
Of his behavior. It finally got to the point where she just couldn't. So she couldn't really work with the kids because he was effectively holding the class to ransom by any measure. So she sent for the deputy. The deputy comes down and basically crouches down and says, "Buddy, you having a bad day, buddy? Come on, buddy." You know, she almost went into a quasi-counseling mode, but at the same time shone a massively significant attentional searchlight on this boy. So he's now getting a huge amount of attention. He was getting it before in his own private logic of a 5-year-old, 6-year-old's workings upstairs, but now it's being reinforced by the deputy. It took her 5 minutes to escort that boy out of the classroom. If she was going to escort the boy out, she doesn't go through that pathetic drama of over-attending to him, but a firm, clear direction to come. And in very, very high-risk situations where there's significant aggression, in the child of other children. We may even need to take the whole class away and the senior teacher stays in the room. So at that point, it's all about the audience. And when I've discussed this with some of my colleagues at university in more detail than I am now, because, you know, we haven't got a lot of time, they've said, you surely don't do that. And I said, well, what would you do then? If a student is effectively holding the class to ransom, what will you do? How much counselling or how much engaging language will you use that doesn't sound appeasing or special pleading language? What would you say and do? And they cannot tell me what they would do, but they cavil at the idea of using safe, respectful timeout in high-risk situations. And particularly if this happens in the first couple of weeks. And that's a red flag for us to then set up a behaviour support plan for the lad, which is what we would do, and do, by the way.
Yeah.
Whether the child's 5 or 15, we set up a behaviour support plan for him and with him, with the expertise of the student wellbeing team, to work with that lad in a structured way, at least once a week and for at least half an hour, whatever other support he might have from professional counsellors or even a psychologist. We work with a lad to develop a behaviour plan to help him to take control of his behaviour. So he's getting a sense of belonging now by not acting out, but by behaving as the other students do in a way that's cooperative and supportive. You know, in other words, sitting on the mat with safe hands and feet, listening with your eyes and your ears, putting your hand up without calling out if you want to share, wait for the teacher to call on you. We actually teach those specific behaviours to the boy, one-to-one away from the group.
Yeah.
And we do it through a directed role play.
Yeah.
Where we actually use picture cues, even simple little drawings, that are directed social stories just to him. They're not an open social story.
Yeah.
The teacher then models that behaviour to the lad, specifically models it one-to-one in the safety of a half an hour session, 20 minutes, an hour session. And then the child rehearses that behaviour with the teacher. And then back in the room, the kinesthetic memory of that session is the cue for the next behaviour episode. And the most common thing the teacher will say, and this is recorded on a small reminder card with a little stick figure drawing of the lad sitting on the mat with, when I come together on the mat, I remember 2, you know, 1, sit with safe hands and feet, listen with my eyes and my ears, put my hand up if I want to share without calling out, and I wait for my teacher to call on me. So those behaviours, which all the other students do naturally, thank God, are now being taught to this lad one-to-one. And at least 6 or 8 sessions are needed in those one-to-one sessions to get workable traction. A one-off session is not enough by itself. And the most common thing you'll hear these teachers say to the students when they're back in the class is, remember your plan. So they don't say, put your hand up without calling out.
Yeah.
The simple cue, remember your plan, is enough to trigger the memory of that rehearsal or practice session. Now, I'm giving you a very truncated view of the program we use, which we call behavior recovery. It's modified as children get older, but the same principle is at stake. We work with a lad one-to-one on teaching behaviours that are appropriate for being at school, including how to organise your study space, including how to focus on the work, having a reading partner. All these options are built in as children get older. Now, this is a labour-intensive model of behaviour support.
Yeah, I was going to say, it's tricky, isn't it? I guess for some leaders.
Well, what else are you going to do?
Yeah.
You see, if they go to a psychologist, which is helpful, please, I would take nothing away from my colleagues who are ed psychs, but they're thin on the ground. you're fortunate if you get once a fortnight. I'm serious. They are so thin on the ground. They are not the best person to make this behaviour plan. For counselling, yes. For links, maybe even to psychiatric counselling with high-risk situations. But the best person to teach behaviour is a teacher. So they teach these behaviour plans in safe one-to-one settings. And when they're back in the room, their engagement with the child is within that plan. And they don't use praise with the child. Praise is counterproductive, but they will use thoughtful, and specific affirmation, acknowledgement, and encouragement, but no praise.
What would the difference be between affirmation and praise? Would you say that's
a huge difference?
Yeah.
If I walk up to a lad, if you're working at your table, you're a grade 4 lad, you have struggled with meaningful time on task, you tend to wander, you tend to sit with your seat a metre away from the table. So we've worked on all of that. We've worked on whole body sitting. We've worked on going straight from the mat, if there's a circle mat time, straight to your table group without wandering. We've worked on how to organise your space within that table group, the physical space. We've worked on how to read carefully the activity that's required with your reading partner. Often these lads need a reading partner on their table group. Not to do the work for them, but to help them.
Yeah.
If they need help beyond their table group partner, to put their hand up without calling out. Now, when we come over and look at the work, and let's say he's written a quarter of a page of work on adjectives describing a special toy or something. We're looking at descriptive. So the teacher comes up and says, Tom, you've used 3 adjectives already here to describe your favourite toy. And you've given me the name of the favourite toy, by the way. And I can see now how big the toy is. I can see what the colour of the toy is. Now think of the other adjectives we used on the board, Tom, and keep going. You're getting there, and it's clear that you're describing your toy in a way that's very clear to the reader. Hang in there, Tom. Another teacher might come up and say, look at what you've done, Tom. That's awesome. It's not awesome. It's a million miles away from awesome. There's very, very few things in this life are awesome. Birth of a child, sunset, the Pieta by Michelangelo, but not doing 5 sentences to describe a toy. What the first teacher did was to give some acknowledgement, a little bit of knowledge about what the lad had done with respect to his writing about adjectives or whatever it is. Could be a woodwork project, anything at all. Bit of drama, artwork. I was in a prison with young offenders, female offenders of quite serious drug offences. And this young woman was 19 years of age. And she was trying to pursue her education in prison. It wasn't an open prison. And the best part of the day for them was the school, to be escorted from their cell to the school within the prison. And it was almost a different world. It was an art activity on Gothic art using soft graphite pencils. And I walked up to her, very heavy smoker, lots of scarring, lots of piercing. And I was there for a week doing mentoring. There was a qualified art teacher, myself, and an ethnic liaison officer in the room. So 3 adults, 6 young women, and a walkie-talkie guard with a, the whole works. And I walked over, and she'd done a lot of work on this piece of art. And I said, how did you get the moon to shine so brightly, Becky, on the in the picture? Because all you've got is pencils and a bit of white paper. She said, well, what you have to do, Bill, you have to, and she started to tell me. I said, how did you work out the shadows to fall with this woman going through the broken archway of this castle? How did you work out where the shadows fall? And I was genuine. I mean, kids can tell, young people can tell. And she started to tell me how she worked out the shadows. We talked about the structure of the castle that was broken and how she made it look realistic in the stonework. This went on for about 5 minutes, which I wouldn't normally spend in a classroom. It was only 6 young women.
Yeah.
And then the young woman next to her said, "Bill, can you look at my work too?" And I said, "Yeah, sure." So I went and had a chat with her. Over coffee, the art teacher said, "I noticed that you never gave any praise to that girl about Becky, about her work. What you had," and she started to unpack, and I wasn't aware of this in the way that she was describing it to me over coffee. She said, "It's almost like it was a conversation about encouragement. So the conversation itself became the encouragement, because she was sharing knowledge with you and you were reflecting that knowledge back to her."
Yeah.
And that's an example of what my colleagues and I call conversational encouragement, which many teachers use. I just hadn't thought about it in the way she described it to me. But because if you keep saying to a student, well-meaningly, that their work is great, brilliant, fantastic, or awesome, when clearly almost little effort has been given or applied, where in heaven's name are they going to see the value of the work they do? Or if they get a sticker with awesome or brilliant or great or wow all the time. So when you give acknowledgement, you're giving a little bit of knowledge back. When you give affirmation, something's a bit firmer from you, the teacher that they're learning to trust and build a working relationship with. A bit of firmness is coming from you to them when you affirm their work, their effort, their contribution, their thought, their time. That's the difference between praise, which is massively high bar.
Yeah.
Narcissists like to reach. So if you've got a student within a fairly solid narcissistic spectrum, they will like that praise, because that says to them, I'm the most important person, not my contribution, effort, time, commitment to the work, but you're praising me. That's the difference between praise and encouragement, or praise and acknowledgement, or affirmation, or enabling. When you enable a student, you're helping him to be more able in his woodwork or his drama or his art or music. And that's what good coaches do. A good coach, in the best sense of the word good, doesn't praise them. They talk about how they did the shot, how they used the saw and woodwork, or whatever, Tom, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, I totally get the difference you're talking about, what it means. I totally understand it. And I've probably been guilty of that at various points. Just saying that's amazing, that's great, when it's probably not really. You know what I mean? I just thought,
and if it was,
because during my teacher training, I was told to praise. I mean, praise was like a big buzzword during my teacher.
I know.
We were absolutely like told to do that, and even to this day, I still see that as a very positive thing. The word praise in the classroom, when everyone says praise, it's like yeah, we need to praise, you know. So,
but praise is a different. Praise has become, like, take the word awesome. It's become a cliche and a default word. It doesn't mean what it means.
Yeah.
When I was in England last year, just to give you a pathetic aside here, I was coming down from Scotland. I was working up there. Laura was with me. I go to the convenience, public convenience on the train. What's on the toilet lid? Be a hero and recycle. Why not be considerate, helpful, thoughtful? How the hell are you a hero by recycling? We were on a tourist bus. A little lad comes on with his mother. Must have been 4. We're up in Leeds. Hero. Legend. Rad. Awesome. In massive letters. I mean, to put that on a kid, I mean, who's met a 4-year-old hero?
I guess
he might be awesome.
He
might be awesome in the mother's eyes, but to put that on, it's lost its meaning. It's lost its genuine currency anymore.
Does some of this relate to expectations some of it relates to the expectations we have, I guess, as adults, as educators. Some of it sort of relates to that, doesn't it?
It probably does. Last year, the end of the year, I took a session with a lot of primary teachers, and this teacher came up and she did cavil at this, and she said, "I don't like what you said about awesome." I said, "I'm not too sure what you mean." She said, "Well, you said we shouldn't say awesome." I said, "I don't think I said that. I was trying to draw a distinction between awesome and other more meaningful ways of communicating with the child, like affirmation or acknowledgement or encouragement." And she said, "I had a student last year who did an amazing essay. He put so much work into it." And she told me about the essay, and he did a first draft. He discussed it with me. He was very thoughtful, and she listed all these things. I said, "Well, tell him that. That's what he needs to hear. Not that his work is awesome, or if you do say awesome or wow, at least try to explain what was awesome about the work." But I wouldn't even start with awesome. It's the wrong word. It's the most unhelpful word to start with. But I would say, Tom, you put, wow, I mean, the amount of work you put into this, no wonder the thing is so firm and straight. To make a cupboard like that, and the way you've braced it at the back, and the way you've sanded those joints so you can hardly see them, Tom. Now, the next step's going to be putting the lacquer on, but my goodness, it's finished now. That lacquer is just going to suit this thing down to the ground.
Yeah.
Well done, Tom. That's going to be more meaningful to you than saying, "Oh, awesome job."
Totally.
What was awesome about the job?
Yeah.
The awesome's too high. It's too high to start from.
Yeah.
It's like that stupid film in the Lego film. Everything is awesome. Awesome. It's not. Most things in life are not awesome. They're a pain in the neck. And the second film's even worse, Tom. I took our grandson to see those two films. But on the way home, when we got some treats, we spent most of our time unpacking what the word awesome means, even to, well, one of them's 18 now, but when they're younger. It was quite fascinating,
I want to move on now.
Sorry to take you there.
No, it's great. It's really interesting. I want to move into like the classroom side of it, and I want us to imagine a teacher who will be going into their job this week, next week, and has a particularly tough class who they teach, and they have them, let's say, twice a week as they're a secondary teacher, and they teach this class twice a week. Now, when you're preparing to teach that class, as in before you even get them into the classroom, is there anything you would say? I mean, okay, maybe some of this will be actually when they're arriving at the classroom, say. Some of it might be before even that happens, but what are those sort of pre-things, like the pre-steps, like getting into the detail of it, like what? Because a lot of people would just turn up to the lesson and try and teach it, right, and try and do a good job in the classroom, but really thinking about the pre-part of that. Is there anything you would say for a teacher in that sense, like even just a mentality thing, whatever,
Yes, I think the first thing is, let's make sure we don't unhelpfully load a new teacher or give a class to a new teacher that's a loaded class, which even experienced teachers would think, "Oh, here we go again." We need to be looking after our first year teachers with a fair timetable load and a fair mix of students. So that's one thing. And that's what when I was talking about a whole school approach before, they're very careful to make sure that the teachers new to the school or first year teachers, either group, do not get unhelpfully loaded classes within the timetable. So that's really important. The second thing is, within their faculty at high school, we would go through all the essential establishment understandings. If there's a lineup policy, for example, in the school, and kids have got hats on, they've still got these little white things, or sticking in their ear for the music. Yeah. They would say, if they're restless outside, for example, they say, "Come on, settling down, thanks everyone." Yeah, settling down. I can see some ear pods there, and the ones I can't see, they still need to be out. We're going to a classroom, and remember your hats, thank you, and your beanies. So even before they get in the room, they're just giving those brief cues.
Yeah.
So they'd say they would say good morning, obviously. Morning, everyone. Look, I noticed quite a few hats on and beanies, and those ear pods need to be away. Remember where we're going. Right, thanks everyone. Let's go in. And
Bill, can I ask you? Can I just interrupt you there and ask you a question? How do you train yourself to not say don't? You did not say don't in that entire monologue. I don't know how you've trained yourself to not say don't.
Well, the aim of all behaviour leadership, Tom, is to raise awareness in the child or the group, right? And with that awareness, then to remind or direct them to where that awareness needs to go. For example, once they're in the room, there's often a restlessness as they're finding seats.
Yeah.
I hope, anyway, that the faculty head has talked about the need for seating plans. So let's assume that's in place. But there's still going to be natural restlessness.
Yeah.
And I would never, ever begin a lesson by saying good morning. If there's a restless group, and we're at the front of the room, Tom, I would say, I can see a number of you are still calling out. Happy to take your questions. Happy to take your questions. Right now, though, hands down, thanks, and eyes and ears this way. Some of you still chatting over here. And when I've said that, by the way, and it's not uncommon, when I've said some of you are still chatting over here, that's to raise their awareness. It's a descriptive cue to raise their awareness.
Yeah.
Some of you are still chatting over here. And when I've said that, it's not uncommon that one of the students say, "We're just talking about why you're here," in a slightly abrasive, attentional way. And the response to that is, even if you're chatting about why I'm here, so you're partially acknowledging, but only partially. Right now, you need to be facing this way and listening without chatting. Thank you. And no please here, just a brief thank you.
Yeah.
Some of you are fiddling with things on your table. It's really distracting. And sometimes I'll add, as a mitigator, maybe you're not aware of it. All right, facing this way and listening, thank you. All right, that's much better. Good morning, everyone. My name is Bill Rogers. I'll be working with you today with your regular teacher, of course. But I will not say good morning until they've returned to me the calmness and expectation I'm communicating to them. And if, for example, a couple of kids are fiddling with the window blinds, I wouldn't say, "Don't fiddle with the window blinds, please." And in fact, I wouldn't even use the word please. But I would raise their awareness by saying, "Bill Alan Nazim, excuse me for a moment, everyone. You're fiddling with the window blinds, fellas, and it is really distracting." That's the raising awareness part, Tom.
Yeah.
Leave the blinds, fellas. Leave the blinds, thanks, fellas, and face this way. So the leave and face is the directional cue. There doesn't need to be a don't there.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? There doesn't need to be a
natural
question.
thing that I guess you almost sometimes, it's just a habit thing. I don't know. Sometimes it can just be a habit thing to say, "Don't do that," or "Don't." I like that, not using it.
There's very few occasions where that needs to be used, Tom. There are occasions that I won't bore you with now.
Yeah.
But most occasions we raise awareness and cue for ownership.
Yeah.
If 2 or 3 kids are calling out, I'll say, "Excuse me for a moment, everyone. Shannon and Dean, you keep calling out. Remember, it's hands up without calling out." Thanks. And it's a very brief thanks as well. And by the way, when the class is settled and facing this way and listening, I don't mean like this. I mean just relaxed and listening. We don't say awesome, guys, or great. It's not great. It's a million miles away from awesome. Just say thank you, thanks. Good morning, everyone. My name's Bill Rogers. I'll be working with you up until lunchtime with your regular teacher. And then I normally, yeah, sorry, go on.
No, I was just going to ask, is body like, because you're doing a lot of hand movements and stuff. So is that planned by you, or is that just your natural way of being, or is that something you've actually thought about?
It's probably my natural way, but because I'm talking to you in this artificial sense, I'm also trying to emphasize. So in the classroom, that would be a lot less
Expressive.
Expressive, yeah.
Yeah.
Because calmness is important. I don't mean a benign calmness. I mean a benign calmness, in a kind of an anodyne calmness, but it's a calmness where you're securing yourself about what you need to say, even if you need to be firm. Like if a kid says that bullshit or crap,
Yes. Yeah.
Excuse me for a moment at least. Shannon, if you want to disagree with anyone in the class, you do so respectfully when it's your turn. And I'd use an adjective that's appropriate. If it's an offensive comment, I'll say that was a really offensive comment and it is not on in our classroom ever. And if the kid says, "I'm just a joke, all right," it's not a joke and it stops right now. And then he'll probably sit there and I've had kids sit there and say, "I can't say anything here." Now that bull dust, that behavior is what I'll tactically ignore. But no way will I ignore an unkind, unfair, cruel or hurtful or even preposterously a preposterous and obscene comment. And if it's an obscene comment, I'll call it out for what it is. What you said was not just offensive, that was obscene. And I expect that to stop right now. And some smile aleck kids have said to me, "Oh, just a joke, all right." It's not a joke here. No way is that a joke here, and it stops right now. So you can be firm but calm. And you're setting an appropriate moral weight there. What weight? You know, there's a moral weight that you're expressing as the adult in the room. And I've had some people who are not teachers who say, "Oh, a lot of this is just street language." And I've said to them, we're not teaching in a street. We're teaching in a classroom, for crying out loud. You can't allow that language to go unaddressed. From the very first time you hear it in the room, you don't let that go. The same with personally disrespectful comments to the teacher or worse. I don't make comments about your ethnic background, Tom, and I certainly don't expect you to make comments about mine, or worse, whatever the comment is. And when you see a teacher doing that, that's a teacher that's in control, not of the students, but of the context in which the students and them are. And the main kids in the distribution are saying, the teacher's right. He's right to say that to him. You know what I mean? But if the teacher's saying, "That wasn't a very nice thing, was it?" and asking a stupid question like that, which is a question, and trying to be nice and be fair to everyone is just pathetic. And that's what I get so upset with. What some pre-graduates are being taught by these people who either haven't or don't know what day-to-day teaching and the reality of classroom life is like for teachers. That's what I get so concerned about, Tom, because it often starts at the university or pre-graduate level.
Because I think in some cases there is like a lot of teachers feel like they have to let things go. A lot now, you know what I'm saying? Like a lot of them are just let that go, you know, sort of thing. There is that, like, in a lot of places, like, and you know,
if they let it,
no, go on. I was just saying, there's huge problems with also the things you were describing, the disrespect, the rudeness, and those sort of things. A huge issue with that, and part of it maybe comes back to what you're saying in terms of people letting it go, but maybe not because they want to, but because they feel they have to to get on, to get by.
But we're just creating the very thing that will end up being the burden for us. I mean, take mobile phones, which are not phones, they're microcomputers. Nobody's got a phone anymore. I mean, I walked up to a year 11 student in one of my classes where I was mentoring a young teacher about 24 years of age.
Mm.
It was on task learning time. She was on the phone. I didn't see the iPhone because she had long blonde hair. But I thought, what? She's not talking to anybody else in the group. And I walked over and it was on task learning time. I said, it's Harmony, isn't it? She turned around, she said, I'm on the phone. I said, Harmony, the school rule's clear. The phone needs to be off and away on Lindsay's desk, that was a young guy I was mentoring, or in your bag. I gave her a directed choice. Didn't touch her phone.
No.
Never touched jewelry. I never touched jewelry or phones or personal things to the student, but I'll give them a directed choice, not a free choice. So I said, it needs to be off on Lindsay's table or in your bag. And she said, it's a job placement call. I said, Harmony, even if it's a job placement call, not arguing with it, but
yeah,
partially and only partially acknowledging, even if it's a job placement call, Harmony, the school rule's clear. It needs to be off and away on Lindsay's table or back in your bag. And at that point, I walked away to give her some take-up time. I walk away. About 20 seconds later, she said behind my back, I'll put it away then if it makes you happy. And then I ignored, but I kept her back for a brief chat later with the teacher I was mentoring. And when I kept her back, she said, I put the phone away. I said, you did put the phone away, Harmony. However, it was the way you spoke to me that I was concerned about and what you went through in order to make the claim that it was okay for you to use the phone. And I've come across many, many students who say, our teacher doesn't mind if we text in class if I've got nothing to do and it's an important text. And I say, I can't answer for other teachers. The school rule's clear. It needs to be off and away, on your teacher's table or in your bag. And if they refuse, and some do, I'll come back and say, if you choose not to put it away, Tom, I'm going to have to follow this up in your own time. So now, as the teacher, I'll telegraph a deferred consequence. And quite a few kids have said to me, I don't care. And you feel like saying, you bloody well will care, but you don't say that. What I normally say is, I care, and then leave them to the consequences, because it's the certainty of the teacher carrying that through that carries more weight in terms of the leadership relationship than arguing with a student. You will care, and I'll make sure we don't start an argument with kids.
Yeah.
Otherwise, we let them dictate where it will go. But I will give directed choices if I believe that's appropriate, and I will use timeout if they hold the class to ransom. If you can't settle down, I'm going to have to ask you to leave and take some cool-off time.
Yeah.
And there has to be, and this is where the backup comes in, Tom. In a whole school approach, we have several timeout options, from colleague-assisted timeout next door, right through to supported timeout, right through to the high-risk one where we may need to escort the audience away and the senior teacher stays with the student in the room. And that's where the school can work together. And also with the follow-up with difficult students. This is where a team leader at primary or a head of year or faculty head can help in that difficult conversation with the student. But if we've had 3 difficult conversations and there's, including a restorative possibility, and there's no change, we should be looking at a long-term behaviour plan for that lad, where a case supervisor acting on behalf of all the subject teachers in Year 8 will...
My last question was just going to be around that tough class. They're in the class. They're doing a lot of these strategies. They're working with the class. I was wondering, like, sanctions, if you've got any view on when sanctions could come in, should come into it. Like you mentioned timeout and stuff. I get that. But are there any sanctions that you look at and say, that's not a very good sanction, that's a good sanction,
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Like, and yeah,
An empty detention is pretty pointless. Well, no, it is pointless, not pretty pointless. If a lad is in timeout for any length of time being supervised by a senior teacher, for example, or a faculty head.
when you say time out, you mean taken out of the class to be somewhere else with them.
To calm down, think about their behaviour.
Yeah.
If and when they're calm enough, but only if and when they're calm enough, the student is normally encouraged to write down what actually happened to cause him to be in timeout, what caused, what rule or right his behaviour was affecting, depending on the age of the child. Younger children will often use simple drawings with a couple of understandings about what happened, what can make things better. This is for very young children. That works very well, by the way.
Yeah, yeah.
The third question will be, what's your side of the story? And what do you think you can do to fix it up or improve things? And the fifth question is, how can the teacher who sent you to timeout help you to fix things up and work things out? Now, they don't write much, but the fact they write something is helpful for the rest of the time if they're calm enough. And when I read those back, when I've supervised timeout, and I've done this many, many times, I ask the lad to read it back to me so I can hear not just the physical words, but the inside words. And they'll often tell me more then, which helps me then to work with that lad as a senior teacher and the teacher who sent him to timeout. Because timeout is not an end in itself. It's a time for the lad to calm down because he's been effectively holding the class to ransom for whatever reason. But there needs to be a restorative conversation. And some teachers, particularly beginning teachers, will need a senior colleague to sit with them to be the moral support, not to take over, but to be the moral support and maybe the prompt from time to time in the restorative conversation between the child or the young person and the teacher. Now, the other sanction, the main sanctions that are used in most schools are detentions. But and there are still schools who use empty detentions where the lad just sits there, particularly if it's a year-level detention or end-of-the-day detention. But in a detention, again, we would use the same questions. I mean, if the lad is if he's being detained not merely as a punishment, but being detained to think about his behaviour. And he should be calm enough by now, although he's probably chomping at the bit because he's being detained. And you probably know that there's been cases in England and some in Australia where parents have tried to bring the school before some legal situation where they're saying you've got no right to detain my child and all this sort of nonsense. Anyway, and again, if a lad's been in timeout or detention 3 times in close succession, he's probably going to be more helped by long-term behaviour support than short-term sanctions. Sanctions by themselves rarely change behaviour long-term, apart from a very, very small percentage of students. The high-risk students, all it will do is create more animosity between the student and the system. So that's why early intervention for behaviour support, and our rule of thumb is 3 times in close succession. We then work on a long-term behaviour plan with the lad. And we're trying to say to the lad, you own your own behaviour, son. I don't own it. Your mates don't own it. Your mum doesn't own it. Your history doesn't own it. You own your own behaviour. Part of my job working with you, half an hour a week or whatever it is to help you to take charge of your behaviour in a way that's helpful at school. And we do it in an honest, upfront way. No patronising, no pseudo-counselling. I mean, real counselling can be helpful, but this is behaviour support. And we'll often use, with older children, we often use analogies. So if they're good at sport, we'll use an analogy where they've been successful and say, you've been successful here in a team. The idea of analogies has been really helpful. It's been something we're doing for the last maybe 5 years. We find an area where the lad's been successful. in any area, even doing mechanical work on his motorbike or whatever.
Yeah.
Where he's put a lot of thought, effort, time, and skill, and patience and energy into this. And this is based on the work of the guy that wrote Lateral Thinking. I've got a mental block. Edward de Bono, the brilliant British psychologist who developed that. And his work has spurred me on. He's long since passed away, by the way. Has spurred me on to realize that if we can find an analogical link between an area where the lad has been successful and proved it in areas like patience, following the rules in swimming, basketball, driving a car, learning to drive a car. I've done that with lads. And all the things I have to do there. And we've listed them down. And I've said, you're telling me you can do all of that in a car, Tom? Seriously? With all that tonnage underneath you, and do it safely and follow the rules as well? You're telling me you can do that? And you take 4 tablets a day for attention deficit hyperactive disorder. You're telling me you can do all of that, Tom? Yeah. So we have this conversation and we say, wait, meanwhile, back at school, I know it's not the same, Tom, but it is similar in these ways. And that seems to be a really useful bridge along which we can travel with each other. Yeah. Beyond any other formal counseling you might be getting from a psychologist. As the behavior support tutor or case supervisor, whatever, there's lots of different terms used in our country. The case supervisor will then work on a plan with the lad and build up, if you like, a behavior repertoire. Yeah. So he can get more meaningful mileage out of school that's going to be useful for him in the future. So behavior support is an area that I've only lightly touched on today, but that has to be the balance to the 5 or 10% of at-risk kids we work with. There's only so much you can do in the public domain of a classroom. Yeah. But where there's the repeated pattern, and our rule of thumb is 3, like detention 3 times, time out 3 times, that's a red flag probably for behavior support, along with anything other issues we know about the family where support may be needed. And the other thing is, with first year teachers, which was the question we didn't explore at length, it really is important to help the teacher to know how to establish their classes, even to the point of how to deal with them in the corridor, whole class settling, sitting plans, whole class discussion, transition from whole class to on task, working voices in the room, right the way through to lesson closure, to talk these through seriously with language cues that are much more likely to be effectively behavior awareness raising than see, what bothers me a lot about beginning teachers, Tom, is that they put so much work into their lesson plans, but almost very little work in the behavior leadership plan, if you will. Yeah. So again, effective schools with their team leaders or faculty heads put a lot of work into this. And again, that's supportive to the teacher as they take up their first classes. And then early follow-up and briefing and discussion about early problems so that they're learning on the job, as it were, with the absolute assurance that any high-risk situation, 3 to 5 minutes will be there in the room. We will not let a teacher suffer with a high-risk student effectively holding the room to ransom. And then we'll work with them with the follow-up as well.
One of the, like you mentioned there about restorative conversations, like they've got a lot of, it's become a huge thing in the UK, as in like
everywhere.
Yeah, it's like a huge thing, right? And but there's some people who would criticize, saying an idea is only a good idea if it can work in a context. So there's some people who would say that restorative practice doesn't, not that it doesn't work, works in theory, but in a school context is very difficult to get right. Because, for example, there's a lot of people who would say, so there's a lot of teachers who say, right, I, went through some sanctions, and the sanction was a restorative conversation, and then that student returned the next lesson, did exactly the same thing again, and then they got another restorative conversation, and then the student returned again, and then it literally went on a cycle like that for weeks and months and stuff. And then there's other people who'd say, well, what is a restorative conversation? Like there's a lot of different definitions of what a restorative conversation should look like and what it actually is, right?
I agree. And without going into the whole...
Yeah, it's difficult to capture here. I get that.
Yeah. But if a restorative conversation does not hold the student responsible for the behavior in the classroom, to me, it's a meaningless restorative conversation. Because in effect, what you're trying to restore supportively one-to-one away from the other children in a one-to-one time of 10, 15, 20 minutes, whatever, and that's labor intensive on our part, and he doesn't like to be there anyway. But in that conversation or in that dialogue, you're trying to make him aware of his behavior and take ownership for it. However reluctantly he takes that responsibility, or however grudgingly, and whatever excuse he dishes up, and he'll dissemble, he'll discount his behavior, he'll distort, he'll even deny his behavior. And every time he does that in that restorative meeting where you're trying to restore, what you're trying to restore is a sense in him that he is responsible for his behavior, and you're supporting him to take ownership of that behavior now and in the future. And again, restorative conversations that miss that, it can become for some students an easy let-out clause. Oh, I've just got to sit and talk to the teacher for 10 minutes and it's sweet, you know what I mean? And I don't want to get in the pros and cons of restorative because I think you need to have them. It's how they're conducted. And if they don't include calling the student to account and to be responsible for what he said, did, took, wrote.
But what does that look like though in the conversation in practical terms? Like, can you model that? Like, what does that actually look like? Saying he has to take responsibility. Are you saying like that just in terms of, if that's me and you now in the conversation, so let's say it's me, I've come out of the lesson with you, you've said, right, I'm going to have a restorative conversation with Tom. I'm appearing now in the conversation with you, and I'm going, right, I've got a restorative conversation as a sanction because that's the way it's been presented, maybe, to me. And
that's the way I see it.
Yeah.
Whatever we do, he'll see it as a sanction. However much we might dress it up in another term, in effect, you've detained him. And the first thing I would do is to say to you, let's say it's lunch recess.
Yeah.
But I know you want to bounce some friends. I understand that. I know you want to be with your friends. I do understand that, Tom. However, in class this morning when we were discussing the solar system, you repeatedly called out, not once or twice, a dozen times easy. What? You called out a dozen times easy. And sometimes I'll even model that to the kid. I'll say, do you mind if I show you what I mean? And I'll model what his calling out looked like, just for maybe 10 seconds tops, so the kinesthetic awareness is there. That's what you did, Tom. And immediately before you give him a right of reply, 9 out of 10 kids will say, other kids call out too. That's true, they do. Shannon called out, Dean called out.
Yeah.
However, when I reminded them, Tom, they put their hand up and joined the discussion. You kept calling out. That's why we're talking now. Anyway, I don't like this subject. You don't have to like this subject, Tom. I'm not talking about whether you like the subject. I'm talking about you calling out in class a dozen times. So each dissembling comment, and I could go through the 20 most common ones. It's not me. Other kids do this too. It was only a joke. I was just mucking around. All that bull dust. We respectfully address that and reframe it back to his responsibility. Once that's been exhausted, and by the way, if they say nothing, I'll reframe it anyway. You're not talking to me, Tom. Not talking to me at all. Perhaps you're saying in your head, it's not the only one who calls out. And then I'll reframe.
Yeah.
Perhaps you're saying, it's not fair and you're picking on me. And then I'll reframe that. I'll reframe what I think is probably going on upstairs. And if they deny it, I'll say, you did. You swore at Chantel. And I've had kids say, you're calling me a liar. Yes, I am calling you a liar, Tom. I'm not saying you lie all the time, but you're lying about that. So it's always specificity to what you're keeping him back for. Then I'll remind him of the expectation or rule or right that he's infringed. And if I can't force an apology, but I can say, if he's hurt somebody by what he's said or posted, the right thing to do, Tom, is to apologize. I don't want to. Even if you don't want to, it's the right thing to do. I can't make you do that, but that's the right thing and the responsible thing to do when you said the kind of hurtful things you said and posted online. But I can't make him do that. That will be counterproductive. But at least I let him know what the right thing is. Then I'll remind him that next time we're in the class, in a class discussion, this is the expectation. You know that already, though, Tom. I'm reminding you now. The next time we have a discussion in class, it's hands up without calling out. Now, is there anything else you want to say, Tom? No, can I go now? Yeah, thanks for staying back. I'll see you next Thursday. And I've had some kids say, I didn't have any choice to stay back, did I? Well, you did have a choice. You could have walked, but you didn't. You stayed back. And I'm reminding you again, Tom, next time we're in the room. So thanks for staying back. So we begin by briefly tuning in, but we don't do this. I've seen some well-meaning teachers who overdo this to the hilt. I'm so sorry, Tom, I've had to keep you back. I'm not sorry I kept him back. I kept him back because it was my professional responsibility to call him to account. And you don't finish by saying, will we be buddies now, Tom? Will you give me a high five? All that bull dust. Kids can see through that, but you will remind them that next time we're in the room and we're having a discussion or settling into our seats, whatever the issue is, you bring him back to his responsibility. All right, thanks for staying back, Tom, and I'll see you next time we're in class, something like that. Now, if that happens 3 times with no meaningful change, we can either start with a very early short-term behaviour plan, or if we think it's more serious, a long-term behaviour support that involves case supervision. And that's where we've had our most reasonable success. Yes, I say success, but it's not perfect success. It's 3 steps forward and 1 step back.
Yeah.
Full of outstanding and world-class vision and world-class this.
I'm a real leadership geek, honestly. I've spent my whole career reading books and chatting to people.
I just find the whole thing and the announcement, the way it's been announced, bizarre.
If you could move away from a model where teachers are so intensely focused